That's all I have with that. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker. We could not have found in the state of Kansas, and maybe even in the nation, a better subject matter expert than Erin Thompson. She has her own legal practice in Topeka and serves as general counsel for Planned Parenthood of the Great Plains. Much of her career has been about protecting civil rights. She was a member of Dr. Tiller's legal team and continues to represent reproductive rights organizations around the country in litigation, and that's keeping her obviously very busy. She has also represented voting rights groups challenging laws that require evidence of citizenship. And maybe most notably for us in Kansas, she was part of the legal team that won the landmark case declaring that Kansans, all Kansans, had a right to body autonomy. So join me in welcoming Erin Thompson.
Jumping right in with breakfast and abortion, aren't we? Sounds about right for Kansas. It sounds definitely right for 2022. But I'm so excited to be here this morning because we have one of the most consequential Kansas elections in my lifetime coming up in 2 months. So I think you all know, but on August 2nd, you will have the right to vote on choice, the right to vote on reproductive health, and your right to vote. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little distracted. And you can vote on your right to bodily autonomy. So did you all know that? This is a little bit like preaching to the choir. You're here because you're interested and engaged, but hopefully by the time I'm done, you'll learn something maybe a little new or have some talking points that you can take back to your friends. So this morning we're going to go over what the constitutional amendment says that's on the ballot, how we got here, what particularly the Hodes and Nauser decision and how that compares to federal constitutional law, and what effect a Kansas constitutional amendment would have on existing abortion law in Kansas. And finally, we'll talk about what you can do. And let me know if you can't hear me or anything, and I will get closer to the mic. So ballot amendments in Kansas are not really that rare. The Kansas Constitution has been amended 98 times. As recently as 2019, we voted on an amendment, and that changed how college students and military personnel are allocated during the census. 2016, we voted on whether you have a right to hunt and fish under the Constitution. So it's not rare, but what is rare about this one is instead of expanding rights, it's taking rights away. And so to get an amendment on the ballot, it has to get through the legislature. It has to pass both the House and the Senate by a 2/3 majority. Once it clears that hurdle, it goes to a vote to the people, and then a simple majority is all that is required for it to pass. So up on the screen, we have the language. I'm going to refer to it, I guess, the Value Them Both Amendment, because that's how it's going to be on your ballot. So the so-called Value Them Both Amendment, it says, the Value Them Both Amendment would affirm that there is no Kansas constitutional right to abortion or to require the government funding of abortion, and would reserve to the people of Kansas through their elected state legislatures the right to pass laws to regulate abortion, including but not limited to in circumstances of pregnancy resulting from rape or incest, or when necessary to save the life of the mother. Pardon me. A vote for the Value Them Both Amendment would affirm there is no Kansas constitutional right to abortion or to require the government funding of abortion, and would reserve to the people of Kansas through their elected state legislatures the right to pass laws to regulate abortion. And a vote against the Value Them Both Amendment would make no changes to the Constitution of the state of Kansas and could restrict the people through their elected state legislators from regulating abortion by leaving in place the recently recognized right to abortion. Pardon me. So you can see there's some confusing language in there. It talks about rape and incest, government funding, regulating abortion, but we'll circle back and talk about what those mean. And then when amendment goes through the legislature, they can elect when it goes to election. So this one was actually passed in 2021, but was set on the August 2nd, 2022 election. So we'll talk a little bit later about why they might have selected that date. I think maybe you guys already know. So why do we have an amendment now? Well, it seems really timely, doesn't it, with Texas having banned access after 6 weeks for the past 8 months. Oklahoma just banned access totally. It's the first state in 50 years to have no access to abortion. And we've all seen the leaked opinion that will likely overturn Roe v. Wade. But this amendment's been in the works, as I said, since 2019, 2020. And so why do we have it now? Well, as been mentioned this morning, there was a Hodes and Alger versus Schmidt decision by the Kansas Supreme Court. In that case, the state banned, in 2015, they banned D&E procedures, which are the safest and most commonly used method for second trimester abortions. So generally, the legislature would pass unconstitutional laws, and then lawyers challenge those laws. We know we have the backdrop of Roe v. Wade. Hi, somebody I went to high school with here. So generally, legislatures pass laws that were constitutional under Roe v. Wade, and lawyers would challenge those laws with the recognition that the Roe v. Wade backstop was there, and likely those laws would be held unconstitutional. So in the past, we would challenge those. When I say we, I mean lawyers. We would challenge those under usually federal constitutional claims, or perhaps raise both state and federal constitutional claims. For example, in 2006, there's a case, Alpha and Beta versus Klein, I think versus Klein. Anyway, Alpha and Beta, and that arose out of an inquisition that Phil Klein, our former Attorney General, you guys remember him? Yeah. He was cool. So it arose out of, he was conducting an inquisition, subpoenaed a bunch of patient files, and was on just a fishing expedition to try to find crime. And so part of the motion to quash the subpoena was that he was misconstruing the right to abortion. So in that case, claims were raised under both the federal constitution and the state constitution. At that time, the state Supreme Court said we declined to find a right under the Kansas Constitution because they have that federal right, and we don't need to find it. So Hodes and Alger versus Schmidt was different because we only raised claims under the Kansas Constitution. Specifically under Section 1 of the Kansas Bill of Rights, which states, all men are possessed of equal and inalienable natural rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So the court in Hodes framed the question as, is the Declaration of Rights more than an idealized aspiration? And if so, do the substantive rights include a woman's right to make decisions about her body, including the decision whether to continue her pregnancy? And we answer those questions yes. So the court went on, and I have more language up there, and the bolded part you can see says, accordingly, the state is prohibited from restricting this rights unless it is doing so to further a compelling government interest and in a way that is narrowly tailored to that interest. So if you're a lawyer, I know there's a lot of you here, maybe you're just a fan of constitutional law, you'll probably recognize that as strict scrutiny. So generally in civil rights challenges, there's 3 levels of scrutiny. Strict scrutiny is kind of the highest hurdle that a government has to meet to regulate something. And strict scrutiny applies when a fundamental right is at issue or if there's a suspect class. And that means race or national origin. There's intermediate scrutiny, and then the lowest level is rational basis. To meet the rational basis standard, you just have to show that the law is rationally related to a legitimate government interest. So the court in Hodes and Alger applied strict scrutiny. There's kind of a saying amongst legal scholars that strict scrutiny is strict in theory but fatal in fact, meaning that no law can survive strict scrutiny, but in fact about 30% of laws have survived strict scrutiny challenges. So how does this compare to the federal framework? So I think everybody knows that in 1973 in Roe v. Wade, the U.S. Supreme Court first held that you have a right under the United States Constitution to an abortion. And in Roe, the court used a trimester framework. The first trimester, all of the interest was in the woman. The government could not regulate abortion in the first trimester. The second trimester was a mixed. The government could regulate abortion, but could not ban it. And then the third trimester, the government had all the interest and could freely regulate abortion. So that was the law for 20 years. And then in 1992, the Supreme Court reevaluated Roe and reaffirmed its central holding that you do have a right to abortion under the Constitution. But Casey changed Roe in that it changed it from the trimester framework to viability. So viability was the line. The government can regulate abortion before viability, but only if it doesn't place an undue burden on the person seeking an abortion. So what's an undue burden? It's a substantial obstacle in the path of the person seeking the abortion. Still, what's a substantial obstacle? Well, 24-hour waiting period, not a substantial obstacle. 72-hour waiting period, not a substantial obstacle. Courts have held. Have to go to the clinic, go back home, come back in 72 hours, still not a substantial obstacle. Which, if you're in Wichita and you have means and you have a clinic in your town, that might not seem like a substantial obstacle. But if you're out in western Kansas, you don't have the means, you have to travel to the clinic, go back home, and then come back or try to find somewhere to stay in those 3 days, it seems like it might be a substantial obstacle. Courts have held it's not. But still, for 50 years, it's been black letter law that under the United States Supreme Court, nearly 50 years, it's been black letter law that you have a right to an abortion under the United States Constitution. And yet, the court decided to hear Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization this past year. In that case, Mississippi passed a law that banned abortions at 15 weeks. 15 weeks is pre-viability, so under Roe and Casey, it seems it would be clearly unconstitutional. But the court still decided to hear that case. And so I think we've all probably seen the leaked opinion. And once they decided to hear it, Mississippi went ahead and asked for the court to go ahead and fully overrule Roe. And so on May 2nd, there was a leaked opinion, and it was Alito's opinion, and it overruled Roe completely. It says it was egregiously decided, it was terrible law, it was based on bad reasoning, it was weak reasoning, Roe is just wrong. And so Roe is no longer the standard if that is what is actually the court's ruling. So what does Alito set as the standard? He sets it as rational basis. And remember, rational basis is the law has to be rationally related to a legitimate government interest. The legitimate government interests that he lists could be considered include respect for and preservation of prenatal life at all stages of development. So if that's a ruling, that means court or states can freely ban abortion. So we expect that to come out here this month sometime. So again, so Roe doesn't really fit into, Roe and Casey don't really fit into any of the other civil rights standards, but we'll say it's here, strict scrutiny is here, so we have a higher standard in Kansas than we have federally. So even if Roe is overturned, we still have our standard that is here. So Roe goes away, we still have the standard that protects our rights in Kansas. You can see the language from the court. Under our strict scrutiny standard, the state is prohibited from restricting that right unless it can show it is doing so to further a compelling government interest and in a way that is narrowly tailored to that interest. So as I said, we do have a higher standard than federal, but what Hodes and Dowser did not do is it didn't negate all the existing regulations. We still have all the regulations we had before Hodes and Dowser. If you're a minor seeking an abortion, you have to have consent from both of your parents. There's our 22-week viability cutoff, the 24-hour waiting period. There's no public funding for abortion, and there's no private insurance. So the state can still regulate it, it just has to be, again, that narrowly tailored to advance a compelling government interest. So what would the amendment do to Kansas abortion law? If the amendment passes, it would basically overrule Hodes and Dowser. So we have our Roe protection, we have our Hodes and Dowser protection. Alito's decision does away with the Roe, the amendment does away with the Hodes and Dowser protection, and then the state would be able to freely ban abortion. So it would allow the passage of new and more egregious abortion laws. It would allow the government to pass a trigger ban, a trigger law, which they won't need. I'll talk about those in just a second, but they wouldn't need because they could just pass an outright ban. And so without the amendment, if we defeat the amendment, even if, or probably more likely when, Roe falls, the women of Kansas are still protected under the Kansas Constitution. So you can see up there on the state what the country is expected to look like after Roe falls. You can see Kansas is white because we would still have access. You can see, so Planned Parenthood Great Plains, our 4-state area, we have the Missouri western side, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. And so Oklahoma's already totally banned abortion. As I said, the first state, 50 years to do that. They passed a Texas copycat style ban that allows private citizens to sue and sue people for aiding and abetting an abortion or providing an abortion. Arkansas has a trigger ban. Missouri has a trigger ban. So I said that a couple times. Trigger bans, what are those? So they are laws that are on the books in Arkansas, Missouri, Oklahoma that say if Roe falls, this law will go into effect. Or like Oklahoma says, when Roe falls, the Attorney General will certify that the pre-Roe law is back into effect. Arkansas has passed, they just pass bans every year, basically. They pass a ban, it gets enjoined, pass a ban, gets enjoined. But as part of those bans is language that if Roe falls, the Attorney General will certify that this law becomes effective. Missouri's is a little different in that it's a ban, but it says this law becomes effective upon certification by the AG. They actually have 3 ways you can do it. The AG can certify, the governor can issue a proclamation, or the House and Senate can do a joint resolution. So we expect that Kansas will really be so necessary for people seeking access after Roe falls. So the vote on August 2nd is not only important to Kansas, it's important to the country. And it's important to our region, and it's important to the people who need that access. And your access to abortion should not be determined by what zip code you live in, but it is, and it already is. So what's at stake? Well, your fundamental right to bodily autonomy is at stake on the August 2nd election. I should have put who this quote is from, but it's from a Damon Young column in the Washington Post this week that I thought was just perfect. You own your body. Abortion is healthcare. Healthcare is a right. That is what is at stake on the August 2nd election, is your right to make the decisions about your healthcare that are right for you and right for your family and not anybody else's business. So, and for the future people to make that decision too. So what can you do about it? Well, the most important thing is you can vote. Yes, vote not right. So you can see up here the election timeline. July 12th is the primary election registration deadline. So if you're not registered, you have until July 12th to register. July 13th, advanced voting begins, in-person and mail-in voting. You have to get your vote by mail application in by July 26th. And then if you're the kind of person that likes to still go to the booth on election day, that day is August 2nd. So who can vote in the August election? Any Kansas registered voter can vote and should vote. That means independents, Democrats, Republicans, and unaffiliated voters can and should vote. You don't have to, generally in a primary, when you're an unaffiliated, you go to vote, you have to pick a party and you have to affiliate. You shouldn't have to in this one. You should just be able to say, I'm unaffiliated, I want to vote on the ballot amendment, and you should get a ballot that just has that on there. So you don't have to pick a party to do this. So why do we think it's in August 2022? Well, because primary elections are generally lower turnout, and most Kansans aren't used to voting in partisan elections. And so I think they were hoping that the party that is more used to having contested primaries would be more likely to vote, which is the traditionally conservative party. I know there's a lot of people from both parties here, but the more traditionally conservative Republican Party is. That's true. But so they're up there on the screen is the kansasforfreedom.com website. Kansans for Constitutional Freedom is the organization that's leading the no fight. It's made up of Planned Parenthood Great Plains Votes, ACLU of Kansas, URGE, which is a reproductive rights group, Trust Women, and the Kansas Values Institute. So those are, yes, the executive committee are those five organizations. There's an advisory committee, and then there are more than 20 grassroots organizations that are part of the steering committee, including Women for Kansas. So that's absolutely right. The other thing you can do is you can talk to your friends. Talk to your friends about the election. You all already know what's going on. You can hopefully get some more people interested in voting and explain to them why it's important. Some questions you might get is, doesn't the amendment include exceptions for rape and incest? No, it does not. It says rape and incest, but it doesn't include an exception for that. The amendment contains no exceptions. And so if it passes, politicians could ban abortion completely. This past session, we already saw a complete ban proposed in committee. It didn't get anywhere because this election's coming up, but they kind of showed their hands that that's where they ultimately want to go. And so I think we can anticipate a total ban if this amendment passes. So why do we care about this amendment? Don't we have Roe v. Wade to protect access to abortion? No, we've talked about this a lot. We used to be able to depend on the federal courts, but the current Supreme Court is more conservative, and it's already begun to chip away at Roe. And I think we've seen from the leaked opinion that Roe will not be with us for much longer. So without Roe, our Kansas constitutional rights are all that stand between us and a total abortion ban. And then another question, I didn't put a slide in, but another question you might get is, doesn't the Supreme Court, Hodes and Nauser decision, do away with any and all regulations on abortion? Because polls do indicate that people think there should be some regulations on abortion. But so if people ask, did the Hodes and Nauser decision do away with all regulations? No. And it didn't do away with the state's ability to regulate abortion. Again, it just has to be narrowly tailored to advance a compelling state interest. And so if you just want the one short and sweet thing to tell your friends, personal health decisions, including about abortion, should be left to an individual, not politicians. So you should vote no on the anti-abortion amendment. So that's some things, that's what's at stake. Those are some action items you can take with you. And then I think,
take this out if you don't mind. Oh, Danny, you might need the other one. For you to say. He's got it. Okay. Yeah. Can I use the mic first? Yeah. Okay, so we know some of you might have questions for Erin to answer, so there should be note cards on your table and some sort of writing utensil. So if you want to write down, if you have questions for Erin, write them down and just hold them up, and we'll come and get them, and that way we can try to get through as many as possible. So do we have one you want me to start?
So, Erin, what about women who have a miscarriage? Will they be accused of abortion if the amendment passes?
so that's a concern in our states. Oklahoma already has a total ban. Texas has a total ban. There is concern about miscarriage management, that it would also be at risk. It should not be at risk. You should still be able to get miscarriage management, but it will be harder, and providers may be scared to help you with it, is the truth. They may be concerned about it. So it shouldn't. But.
Can you explain trigger bans again and what those legally do?
You know, I wish I knew, because the reality is we've never been in a situation where our rights are being taken away. And their trigger bans they've never happened before. And so to me, it doesn't make sense that the government can say all these court rulings are no longer in place because we've passed this law that says I just have to certify that they're no longer in place. So in theory, what happens is Roe v. Wade falls, the Supreme Court overrules Roe v. Wade, and say the Attorney General for Arkansas certifies that it has fallen, and so the laws go into effect. And so in theory, it could be that right at that moment, Arkansas has a total ban in place. I would think they would still have to file something with the court to get the injunction lifted, but I mean, it's not quite clear how it's going to work out. The theory of the trigger laws is that they will totally ban abortion as soon as they're certified by whoever the certifying person is.
Okay, the next one is, if SCOTUS used rational basis test, will Kansas case be challenged for using strict scrutiny?
Kansas cases will still be challenged under Hodes and Nauser under the strict scrutiny standard unless the amendment passes. Then that right would, the ruling on Hodes and Nauser is based on the fact that they have found a right to abortion under the Kansas Constitution. The ballot amendment would say there is not that right under the Kansas Constitution. So they would probably look to federal law to interpret it, which at that point would be rational basis.
Okay. Will the governor be able to veto any of these bills?
Yeah, well, yes.
Yeah, so in other words, I think the question is asking, even if vote yes succeeds, if the legislature passed something and the governor vetoed it, we would still stand at where we're at right now.
Correct. So also, obviously, the governor's election is important.
Okay, so what about people who have fertility or infertility challenges and health procedures?
Yeah, there's also a lot of concern about that, particularly, I mean, we saw our Oklahoma ban that went into effect a week or two ago says since since conception, no abortion since conception or something. But they also, in that law, they put in explicit exceptions that this doesn't apply to contraceptive. So I wouldn't, it depends on what the law actually says that would ban it, I think.
And we also have several questions about contraception, but I think you've answered that. It'll depend on how they write the law. Okay, have you heard anything about corporations in Kansas, such as Blue Cross Blue Shield of Kansas, or any making public statements about the amendment?
I haven't heard. I don't know that. I've been super tuned into that, but I have not heard. I'd be surprised if they do.
Oh, does anyone here know of anyone? A corporation or? Nope. Okay. Okay. What if the amendment fails? What is the chance that new members of the Kansas Supreme Court could overrule any actions?
Yeah, they could, just like happened with Roe v. Wade. The Hodes and Nauser case is actually currently pending before the Supreme Court. So the original decision was on a temporary injunction. They remanded it back to the district court and said, you need to evaluate this case using the strict scrutiny standard. The court did that, the district court did that, and granted the summary judgment. So the case is giving the case to the plaintiffs, which were the providers in that case. The state has appealed that to the Supreme Court, saying that they've wrongly decided the original. They're saying, hey, court, you were wrong 3 years ago, please reconsider it. And so, yeah, if they're, new members of the court, just like happened on SCOTUS, they could decide that it was wrongly decided.
What if the Kansas amendment passes, could abortion be provided on Native American reservations in Kansas?
That's a question that comes up a lot. I think we need to be very careful about asking our BIPOC friends to take on something that we are not willing to take on ourselves.
Agreed. Yeah. Could we oppose the amendment by saying that its passage is an example of big government in an effort to appeal to?
Yes. I mean, we saw, it's a bit hype, we saw on the mask, sorry, I'm stumbling over my words, but on the COVID and masking, we saw all of these arguments being used against being forced to wear a mask. And so a lot of people don't want government in their healthcare decisions. And I think this is a expansion on that.
All right, if the national U.S. Congress becomes more conservative, can they pass national legislation to ban abortion and override our state constitution regardless of this amendment?
Yeah, I think they could.
Why are current anti-abortion commercials lying about our current law in Kansas?
I don't know. Because I mean, the reality is the Fort Hays State Docking Institute they do a study every year on Kansans beliefs, and this last year in 2021, more than 60% of people felt that there should be the access to abortion, and greater than 50%, barely, but greater than 50% said that abortion should not be regulated in any circumstances or any ways. So the majority of people support the right to abortion. So they've got to they have to lie about it because it's not a popular opinion.
Okay, so does my church risk losing its tax-exempt status by placing vote no and or campaign signs on their property?
Well, I mean, I am not a tax attorney, so I don't, but I have seen many vote yes signs on church properties. So
I would encourage you, if you want to make an IRS complaint, you should make it. And if it's invalid, they will not follow up. Or they won't follow up anyway. Sorry, off topic. Okay, so what are your thoughts on prohibitions for people crossing state lines to seek medical care?
Well, they should not have them. No.
Agreed.
But whether they're valid, my tongue-in-cheek answer is in the before times that would clearly be a violation of freedom to travel in constitutional premises. But I don't know that the Supreme Court, I was shocked that they let the Texas law go into effect. And so I don't know what the Supreme Court would do. I think people will be able to travel because they won't, where they are traveling to, if you come to Kansas from Oklahoma, it's not a crime in Kansas to get an abortion. And so you are not aiding and abetting a crime because there is no crime. And so I think people should be able to freely travel. I know providers are very nervous about that and what might come. But.
Okay. What is the legal basis of Texas's use of private citizens to enforce a ban? Will that stand in your opinion?
Well, as I just said, I was shocked that we talked about this a year ago. Like, have you seen the crazy Texas law? Like, can you believe that? That's never going to stand because you have to have, there's traditional things, you have to have standing to sue somebody. Like, that's a pretty basic premise of law, but it's in effect. It's been in effect for 8 months now. Kansas and Oklahoma have served more than 2,300 patients from Texas seeking access. So it's, I don't know that many states are going to copy that because they're going to be able to totally ban abortion after Roe falls.
Yeah. So. Okay, so let's imagine that it's passed, the amendment in Kansas. What would the new Kansas Attorney General's role be in enforcing it?
Another question we get a lot. So if you have a friendly prosecutor, will you still provide? It's hard.
Okay, sorry.
Oh, okay. So the Attorney General, if it would ultimately, if there's a criminal law passed, would ultimately probably be the person who would prosecute those, and district attorneys as well.
Why is local media not doing a good job of explaining this special election and its how it operates?
I'm not sure.
Do you want to address, we're getting into the weeds here, substantive due process?
Do I want to address that?
Sounds like no.
Is there a more specific? Okay.
Okay, so, this is a qualification on a previous question.
Okay.
So not if we should ask Native American reservations to provide space for abortions, because that has the issues you discussed, but rather if Native Americans chose to pursue that, would they be legally allowed to?
I think so. I'm not sure. I mean, it's again one of those things we just don't know what.
I mean, wouldn't that only work if it was in their own tribal health facility and not an IHS facility?
Or
right, we'd have to.
Yeah, I mean,
the
if
complexities there.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. In talking with friends, it could be helpful to talk about various angels. So there is much talk about a woman's right to control her body, but what is the status or law about requiring the fathers to do something?
Yeah. I think talking points to consider are you'd be liable for child support. You could have other things implicated. I know one legislator in Oklahoma, kind of tongue-in-cheek, proposed that he would, if their ban passed, he would propose everybody has to have a vasectomy until they reach the age of being able to make wise decisions about this. So.
Okay, we have several questions about this. Will the morning after pill be considered abortion, and has the legislature discussed specific kinds of contraception in their discussions?
I admit I don't know exactly what the legislatures discussed in recent years, but I'll draw on, because I've spent so much time with Oklahoma law the last couple months. But again, that one specifically says it does not apply to contraceptive, and so I think it would depend on how the law is written and what it says. I do think the total ban that was in committee this year kind of had language that made it look like IVF and different things could have been implicated by it. So I think we need to be careful and look at the language.
Do you have any advice for, so the folks that are in support of the amendment seem to be very organized, and they have their ads and their signs and whatever. What recommendations do you have for the vote no folks on how they can make their voice louder and their message heard?
I think this is a great opportunity for grassroots, and because the support is there, I think. So one thing I keep thinking is, if everybody in here committed to getting 10 people to the polls and getting 10 people to vote, I think we have 200 people here, that's 2,000. 2,000, I went to law school because of the numbers. That would be 2,000 if each of those people committed to 10 people, so that it could build pretty quickly. So Kansans for Constitutional Freedom is being very intentional about their messaging, because it's clear that messaging, people are very moved by messaging. And so they are conducting focus groups. They're doing a lot of feedback on what language is right. And so they're trying to get the message right. And so they do plan to have commercials, and it's all going to be coming pretty soon. So.
You could probably also give financial resources to those groups. Kansans for Constitutional Freedom, Women for Kansas is going to do some advertising. Yeah, Lynn, raise your hand. We talked about your postcard campaign. If you're looking for someone you'd like to talk to about that. I have postcards here if anybody wants to take them. If you want to take some home too.
And
okay.
Lynn, I brought some more too from KC.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so this will be the last question before we go on to our next break. Would you feel comfortable sharing your PowerPoint with us so we could share it with the folks who are in the room?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Oh, there's... Okay, before Erin leaves, we have a special dispensation we want to give to Erin. Yes, and Susan's going to help us with this.
All the members of the Educational Foundation Board, could you please stand up? This is the board that receives grants and works on educational issues. And when we got together and we decided we wanted to donate to an organization that really educated women in Kansas, we could think of no better organization than the Kansans for Constitutional Freedom. So please accept our check. It's a small one, but for $500. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Two things. First, join me again in thanking Erin for a jam-packed presentation. And Erin, will you be here for a bit? Okay, so if you've got other things you want to talk about, she'll be hanging out.